Hello everybody. My name is Victoria Thornton and I'm a board member of Thornton Education Trust, which we often call it TET. And this is most probably a TET morning, but we will have a TET tea another time. So this is our first event post our inaugural webinar at the end of March. As a new charity that really is encouraging and encouraging the various practitioners who are really involved in bringing architecture built environment to the future generations. And one of the ways we'll be doing this is through awards. And this will be organised and set up this coming May. But we also want to have some informal chats, because one of the other things we want to try and achieve is really people sharing knowledge. And there's a lot of knowledge out there, especially by many of the practitioners. And we feel that really we need to gather this as sort of capacity build, because I think we all recognise there's a massive amount of work going on, but it's not necessarily pulled together, and people don't often recognise the important work that everybody's doing at the moment, and many of you yourselves here. So one of the reasons for these is so we can actually hear from everybody. So it's very much why we say it's a panel today rather than speakers, and because we'll be talking about one of the questions that came out of the webinar before, but it's really to open up any other questions you have or thoughts, because I think it's just getting this out there. So we'll start by having the first question to the panelists, but then really open up and do chat. And if you've got a question about it, and if once we've moved a bit further in, if you want to actually say something, raise your hand and I'll come to you and things. So, but just try and think of it in terms of the question in hand, and then we'll have much more of an open Q&A on the floor. The other thing is we'll be finishing at 11 o'clock. So just think about your questions. And if you really got burning, just keep pressing me on the chat and everything else. So I'd like to just welcome again the panelists as such. And one is another board member, which is Neil Pinder, who's a teacher, and he'll say very briefly about himself, I'm sure. Fiona MacDonald, who is a practitioner, and she's one of our associates and is also now head of Learning and Design Museum. And Frosso is one of our other associates, who actually is, I would say, from the academic world, from the Bartlett School of Architecture, but tutors on first year particularly. So I think it's a really good mixture we have here in the panel. I'm just going to just sort of look at the question we're looking at is basically about how young people benefit from participating in what we call placemaking, community engagement projects all around the built environment. We all talk about what this personal development is, but what we're trying to do today is maybe unpack this a bit more and say, well, what does that mean to those young people, but also to young professionals as well? Because when we talk about young, it's both ways. What it is personal development for young people. And one of the questions from, I don't know if Ellie's here, was saying, you know, she's studying, but she wants to get much more involved in this area. And how do you do it? In a way, even how do you do it as a career? And whether there's any channel or roadmap to even do that as well. So let me quickly pass over to Neil, then Fiona, and then Frosso. But just to, as I said, Neil will take 5 years to decide whether we've actually achieved our goal or not, one way or the other. We put a goal on ourselves. Neil was told he had 3 minutes last time to talk about himself, and I said, well, now you have 2 minutes, Neil, so over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I mean, good morning, everyone. Yeah, we're going to be finishing at 12 o'clock. I like to make you laugh at the beginning. And yeah, I'm Neil Pinder, and I'm a product design and architecture teacher at a South London school called Graveney. And I introduced architecture into the curriculum about 15 years ago, or just over. My primary aim for going to the school was that I could develop what Victoria was doing, which was our London Open House, our educational programs at the time. And that was my proviso for me going to the school, is as I said to them, if I can do this and you give me a bit of a free rein. So from then on, I've been engaging with practices. I've been engaged with educational authorities who are creative, and also engaged with initiatives, which are referring back to what the question was about, is how do you get involved? Is there a lot of good initiatives out there which will entice, engage you guys to get involved in? And it's just, there isn't a directory at the moment. Maybe we could do that, Victoria, make a directory of people. Later on, you'll see I've got a little bit of a spider diagram, which was created by an architect who I'm in collaboration with at the moment, Dennis Austin. He's on the screen. And he basically translates all of my ideas, and we talk and we get on, and he puts them into architectural terms where I'm a bit more abstract in fairy, some people may say. He tends to knuckle me down. I think that's 2 minutes, yeah?
Yeah, great. Fiona.
Hi everyone, it's so nice to see so many familiar faces from around the world and lots of new ones. So I'm currently head of learning at the Design Museum, but by background originally trained in architecture. And I suppose speaking to the point about the impact that sharing built environment projects with young people and empowering them, I can also selfishly speak to the point of how I used to be a young practitioner, and the curiosity and the way it opened my eyes to think about space and the built environment in a completely different way, and the importance of that to the profession, alongside the importance to young people of having being given open-ended questions and empowered both not only in terms of actual skills, but in terms of realizing that they will be listened to, that their observations and intuitions and lived experience is highly relevant and can make the world a better place for everyone. And then how do we dig into the mechanisms of making that happen? So alongside, I had the fortune of meeting Victoria and lots of you in my days when I worked at Open City, and since then have gone on to set up another organisation with an odd name, Matt and Fiona, but which represents a long kind of friendship with another practitioner, Matthew Springett, who is willing to take risks in terms of a design process. And perhaps as an industry, we can sometimes be quite risk averse and want to know what the outcome will be when we set off on the journey, rather than seeing where it will take us. So that's briefly what we try to do.
Thank you, Fiona. Rosso.
Hi, hello. Victoria called me an academic. I am not an academic. I'm working in academia, but I'm definitely not an academic. Two things I would like to tell you. Okay, I'm running first year for a very long time, but I started teaching only to share the excitement with kids. And I started with diploma and then degree students, and finally I ended up in first year, only to share the excitement of what is the magic of putting a building together and what that means. So I always had that as a role, that, you know, we're all together and it's fantastic. So the other thing is, I met Victoria years back, but first I didn't meet Victoria, I met her baby, the open house. And for me, it was a fantastic in London that you had, it's almost like a British street party. You had builders, clients, road sweepers, friends, architects, all celebrating on a Sunday, on a Saturday, visiting. And the idea of opening up the whole cultural day for that, and was for me magical, and also the pleasure, and not of these silos that everybody's now. So that I loved. So my question to all of us today is, when we're talking, what is personal development and what is the built environment? And for me, That's what I think we should have some fun discussing. What do we mean by built environment being engaged? And what do we mean by personal development? So if my time is up, I'll stop, but that's what I want to come back.
All right. Thanks. So already we've got quite a lot through there, and I just want to welcome, because I know Venetia I see here, who has worked and was great as part of the head of learning at Open City. So it does feel like a bit slightly converted here, but it's really welcome. And Robert, who is in, I think you're still in Santiago, Robert, there, and there's a connection. So one sense we're slightly talking to converted, but hopefully not, but that is the first step. And I'd just like to introduce Penny Hay, who's just having a thing, who I've been kind of in conversation a lot here in Bath, from Bath Spa University, and she's set up something called Forest of the Imagination, which happens every year, and it's really about play and enjoying your spaces and the nature. And I just like to push that, because when it's up and running, you really should come and see it as an example as well, because it is fantastic. So moving through, do put your questions into the chat room as well. So please take that route. And coming back to, I'm going to say to Neil first. So you're a teacher. So when we talk about this personal development, how do you recognize it? But also, I think we're really interested in TET is about the how, because we all can talk about the what, but how do we make whatever go forward, or encompass it, recognize it, embed it, change mindsets, have a roadmap. So it's really always about the how. So though the what is how can we do maybe it better, or what else do we need? So Neil, do you want to kick off first?
Yeah, do you mind sharing the screen with me, please?
Yeah, sure.
And because basically, I think we remember we was in a, there we go. Okay, wait there. Right. Can you see my screen? I can see yours.
Oh, right, Mr. I got the wrong one. That doesn't help, does it? It's really gone. Sorry, it's gone a bit odd at the moment. Doesn't help much.
So while you're doing that, is basically we was in a launch of another organisation last week, and one of the speakers put up a diagram of how education and where design is a taxonomy, Bloom's taxonomy, and basically I looked at it, and all week it was just playing on my head, and I kept asking my students, and I refer back to my students all the time because they're my sort of base, and I feed off of them, they feed off of me, and we bounce off of each other. So what I've done, if I can get a screen up, is I've done my own one, and I was going to put it up, and I'd like all of you guys to do one yourself and see where you put the emphasis on.
Your co-host, not Neil, now, so you should be able to.
Right, let's have a look. Yeah, right now, yeah, right, great, excellent. So, let me just get this all together. All right, let me see. If you just bear with me 2 seconds, and then I'll make sure that everything is perfect. All right. Yeah. Oh, here we go. There it is. Right. Right. Can we all see this now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. There it is. So that's how I confer with my students, and we talk about, and I talk about my students about the circular economy of education, because it's not just about myself. It's about how you interact with your students and how you feed to them, they feed to you. And it's a learning process as we go all the way through. And I don't think at any single stage do you stop. So I looked at this diagram, the original one, which had it up the other way, if some of you are familiar with it. 1956, approximately, this was deemed as the way forward. But I think what we have to do is, like, we're asking all these questions, how, but I think we're basing them off of sort of a Jurassic Park sort of roadmap to education. So my question, and I'm throwing it back to you guys, how would you put the emphasis of creativity? And I suspect most of you have put creativity as the sort of center part down here, because in my mind, it holds every single thing up. And the brain is so creative. Well, my brain is so creative, and it's thinking all the time. So throwing it back to you, I'd like everyone, I know I can share this with you at some point, well, at any point.
Neil, can you just make it larger? Can you make it larger?
Make it like,
yes.
Yeah. Hopefully it won't go off the screen if it gets larger. Can you see that? Go down a bit, back down, stop. Yeah. Yeah. Is that better? Right. So I'd like everybody to who's in the room at some point, if you get the chance, just even write it out, scribble it out, because that's how I did it in the beginning, and see where you place your emphasis. I've shifted things around. So if you look at the one that was done in the 50s, it wouldn't be in this order to begin with. And the understanding, analyze, remember, evaluate, and apply is not in that order. So you choose the order that you'd like to do it in. But I think if we're gonna set about a new course and think about setting a 5-year plan, I think we have to get the base right first, and then move forward. And then we could talk about the other areas, which I'll explore later on in this sort of chat room. Is that fair enough?
It's fine. We can get some comments back. Maybe Frost and Fiona liked it. Do you want to take it off again? So we've got
yeah. I just think it's good to multitask here. It's nice to throw to the audience Neil's points or sort of ideas, and then if all, I mean, that's how I see it, rather than trying to make it sequential. So I just wanted to say something I believe very strongly. To be able to establish the how, I just think we need to remember two things. From my education, my secondary school years were the most sad years of my life, really sad, because it was all this stress and it was all this, it was a race. And both my parents were amazing educators, and it was fantastic. The least of the parents that push you at all, but the schooling was horrible. So I just think before we we explore the how, two things are missing. Children, students, let's call the period from 5 years old to 18, progressively, they are not allowed to dream or take time off to daydream particularly, and they are not allowed to be part of the reality. Have you seen ever a mother or a father that says, my child can go and help sweep the roads or plant some trees? Oh, they'll get ill or they'll be run over. So this idea of mistrust, that the kid cannot be part of the reality, one extreme, and they cannot be part of daydreaming, for me is the essence. And the kids are squashed, the students, the children are squashed into the middle of, they have to learn, they've got to be in this silo of learning, and it's not learning really, it's like academic sort of, it's like a fire squad of all the time. I mean, I feel so passionate about that the students who are teaching at the moment is not, it's crippling. I mean, we don't get the students or the people that would excel and be creative. We get people that the tick box of all universities or establishments or offices or through CVs, and the digital neutralizes everything, are, machines of production, creative production. And I just think that's the essence. We are all rushing. We don't allow people to daydream, students, and we don't put them in reality. So to the initial Victoria's question, how can young people develop the personality? That's the essence, I think.
Thanks, Frossa. Ellie, you've got so great from the audience, Ellie. I know.
Yes, hi. So yeah, just building on that point, really, I think it touches on an interesting aspect of how we consider personal development. And at the moment, especially in education and in how people look at the idea of success, it's very focused on progress, and it's focused on achieving things and moving towards what people see as the next step. And I think touching on something Fiona said about, you know, valuing their lived experiences and who they are now, I think there's so much importance in opening up that definition of personal development, where it doesn't have to be this linear thing where you're constantly reaching for the next stage. It's about acknowledging the power and the you know, the place that those children are at now, and part of that is valuing those lived experiences and giving them power to value them themselves, because I think a lot of the time there's a disconnect. You know, if it's not a GCSE exam answer, they sometimes don't understand the value in it.
Thanks, Ellie.
Mm-hmm.
Fiona, do you want to come in at all on that? Just to...
Well, I want to pass out, because I know there's so many interesting people in the room that I want to pass over to them, but Ellie, I completely agree with you, and it seems to be an endless conundrum for our education system that we delight in setting sort of molds that young people need to fit, and actually maybe the world needs the young people rather than us to push them through molds that aren't necessarily working, and it's how do we bring the people who could have the power to shape those curriculums into the conversation and not continually kind of talk to the converted. Can I pass over, Victoria, to the other Ellie whose hand is raised?
Right, sorry, I missed that one. And then maybe Penny, because you've just put in a bit of a chat, so maybe you just kind of comment as well afterwards. So hi, Ellie.
Hello. Just to comment on Ellie's comment, I think, so I've done my part too, and I'm quite early in the architectural journey, and I think you're spot on with you follow a tunnel, and I'm someone who, I don't know if I do want to be an architect or I don't, but this whole education of young people excites me so much. But you almost have to finish my architectural tunnel, and then I'm allowed to come out and explore what I really want to do and my passions. And I don't know, the weight is very different. It feels like if you follow the educational path, you know, you failed as an architect, but there's that kind of, do you know what I'm trying to say? I think the value is lost somewhere, and I want to try and find it. I think I'm trying to say, and this is perfect. This is what
Ellie, break the rules. I don't know if it's helpful to know, but I felt that, and the irony of 10 years ago, my tutors from university used to sort of, I felt pity from them and sort of, what are you doing? Could you not make it in architecture? And now they all want me to teach in their universities in a very short period of time. Yeah. So I think sit with follow what you want to do, and if you're following what you want to do, then that will lead you to a good place. And I think there's also a lesson there for what we teach young children and young people, the same thing, to have pride in what you're about and what your instincts tell you to do, and don't feel you have to be swayed by what you should do.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in there? You see, I knew it was going to go to education, because education is the bedrock of all the things that are wrong with the way we're teaching kids today. And I don't want to monopolize it too much on education, but if I just give you a little background, at this precise moment and subsequent governments beforehand, we got targets, and parents are complicit because they feel that they have to. They've been shoved down an alleyway where in schools they're looking at test, and they tested to beyond all belief, and it's starting at such a young age. They're tested. So parents have been literally brainwashed to think that if my son or daughter or young person isn't at this standard by this age, then they're failed. And then what do? They go and get them a tutor. And then they go and get them a tutor and a tutor, because they feel that next stage from primary school, they've got to get into the right school in the right area, and they're looking at academia, all the way through. And if you don't come out with your X number of grades, you're failed, you've done this. So last week I did an open day in a school, which was basically the last stop for kids who are going to end up in some sort of trouble. And from talking with all these kids who had aspirations, basically I was introducing them to creativity, architecture, etc. And there were some fantastic kids there. But just by asking them what subjects they're doing, I automatically knew where the school had put them straight away. And this is what happens in the educational system. And I don't think at this precise moment, we are going to change that. It's about integrating, the how is integrating more creative subjects. And I show you the taxonomy to begin with, purposely because I think, and I know that if we put creativity at the base, and as Fiona was saying, Emily was saying, and Foster was saying, then we open up people's minds, our young people's minds, creative minds. And that is where it has to begin. At the bottom there with creative, there's got to be more creative subjects integrated into the curriculum at every single stage. How do you do that? That is the question.
Okay, thanks. Penny, I asked, Frosty, you're going to have to wait a minute. So, Penny, sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's really interesting, keeping an eye on the chat as well in terms of people's comments. So I'll come back to Dennis's point in a minute. But yeah, so just to comment on Ellie, I was talking about, so my work is very committed to children and young people's creative pathways, right from the beginning, right through, well, school, but informal and formal education. And with those aspirations, if children choose the route into university or college or creative industries, and one of the routes obviously through architecture and design. So I think that's Victoria knows that's where my passion is. Coming back to passion, I think Ellie, the strapline, I run a charity called the House of Imagination. Ken Robinson was our patron for 20 years. So you'll realise where a lot of my influences come from. But in terms of, our strapline is the freedom to follow your fascinations. My PhD was on children's creative inquiry, so self-directed inquiry, and that's why I mentioned the importance of intrinsic motivation. So I worked alongside the same group of children for 5 years and documented their learning to understand better what the role of the adult is in that process, and thinking about that idea of, well, it's called hertagogy, don't get worried about terms, but self-directed inquiry. So you choose what you want to pursue. There's a wonderful book, actually, happens to be on my left, just by chance. We ran a project called SEEDS, Creative Education for Disaffected and Excluded Students. We actually changed the title to Creative Education, Disaffection, Exclusion and Society. And we were looking at how we could re-engage inverted commas school refusers or excluded students back into their learning through the arts. And they wrote a manifesto, and the first phrase in the manifesto is, there are no performance indicators for passion. And I think it's really important that, I want every child and young person in the country, no matter what their background or circumstance, to want to get up in the morning, and if they choose to go to school and to love learning and to find themselves, that they are following their passions and following a live inquiry that they're curious about and make connections with. And I suppose that's why I connected well with Victoria's work, and also just to introduce Amy will hate me because she's also very modest, but Amy and I have worked together for a long time, first of all with the Architecture Centre in Bristol, but on the notion of my place, children as creative placemakers in the city. And we've both been hugely involved in the Child Friendly City initiative in Bath and Bristol. So I'll shut up now. Amy, do you want to say anything while I've got your cue?
No, just very briefly, thanks Penny. It's just it's really nice to say hello, and there's lots of faces that I recognise on the call, and yeah, it's really great, Victoria, that you're convening the trust and convening these conversations, and really keen to be involved in them.
Great, thanks. And I think one has to remember, though, some of us are sort of London-centred. This whole point is of the trust is it's national and eventually international, because I think we can learn from many other places. It isn't just the area of us in Britain to do with our education system, but actually this conversation really is throughout the world. And Jorge at the webinar was really indicating that, and it's actually worth looking at some of his work and his publications as well. Can I just go back to, and I know Frost has got a hand, but I'm going to go to Frank Monaghan, because you picked up Frosso's point about release time and things. Do you just want to say a bit more about that?
Me or no, him?
Frank, yes. You've got to you're on, yes.
Yeah. Hi there. Yes, thanks for inviting me to participate. Yeah, just picking up on Frost's point. It's interesting, you know, that it seems to be that I'm based in the west of Ireland in Galway. We've the edge, and we recently initiated a program called Design Lab, actually working with Fiona MacDonald and Matt Springett of Matt and Fiona, who we'll be meeting later again today. It's interesting, but there's parallels, like you said, about the international dimension, and there's a very interesting series of conversations happening with Creative Ireland on Creative Youth this week. I think there's an online webinar tomorrow, which is actually worth listening into, because I think it's a similar situation. I think we can learn a lot from each other. One of the speakers, I'm trying to remember who it was, mentioned the fact that there's no release time, and I think we find that in the program that we're doing at the moment, that it's very difficult. I mean, obviously there's very difficult circumstances around COVID and restrictions around that, but where the teachers, I feel, are under immense stress, and I get the impression that they're very time poor. But while they make room for the program, it's sort of because it's extracurricular, I suppose, it's very hard to fit that into the overall day-to-day program of what's planned and the learning for the children. So there's that. There's actually allowing the creatives and facilitators like ourselves that might come into the schools to work with teachers or with young people to allow the space to develop those programs rather than leaving it to just the actual event where it actually happens, but actually via maybe CPD or some sort of program that sort of might be developed outside of that system, that there's some sort of benefits, I suppose, that the teachers get from taking part in these. But critically then, of course, it's all about the young people and about the children, and giving them the time to test ideas and experiment and learn. And I suppose looking at Neil's steps to be able to go through that process, and that all takes time. So fundamentally, it's got to start with that partnership between the teachers and the facilitators, I think, and actually developing that. And I don't know how everybody feels about that. Do they feel there's enough time out from the curriculum to allow this to happen? I think, you know, I picked up on Frosa's point. It's all about that experience then, about, I suppose, if you're a young person, if it's to be given that freedom to, you know, to roam, I suppose, with your imagination, and to test things, and is there space within the curriculum, or do we need to make space in the curriculum to allow for this sort of creative freedom, I suppose, to kind of let that roam?
Thank you.
Yes, that's the point.
Frost and then Kate, do you want to, and I want to just pick up on what Frank said as well. So
yeah, it just I just don't want to forget some comments on picking up from the last point of Frank, but mostly from from Penny, because I'm really very emotional now, because I thought I did not want to be the #1 addict of Sir Ken Robinson, because I thought, nah, it's too much. I mean, this guy died last, I mean, a lot of you know him, but I think the vision and the power and the wit and the decision-making that he sort of cultivated through the years. So what we are talking about now is quite a lot of stuff. So it probably is good to isolate a few. So picking up from Penny's, I think to our purpose, which is how can this personality develop and how can the stimulus of the built environment, the exposure, it's because we want the kids to use, the students, to use Ken Robinson's thing of their element. Their element is once they discover a passion, whether it's you sweeping roads or making sort of balloons or building whatever or making cakes, once they find their passion, then they're up there. You can trust them with anything. And I think the problem is that unless we inform governments and national curriculum, we can leave it. Oh, it's a lovely little school in Wales and a great school in Scotland. That's not good enough. We really need to be, universities are complete responsible for that. Schools, of course, as well. And it's these productions, it's like making sausages. It's this complete successful production. And I think teaching is not delivery only. It's mentoring, it's supportive, it's being prickly and just say, what the hell are you talking about? Provoke them, but also love them. And this idea of, you know, unless you show love and care, and also to be austere, not austere, what's the word in English? To be strict, you know. At the moment, everybody's afraid to be strict and hug people. Everybody's by the book. I cannot stand that, as most of you know. And it's lovely, by the way, to see Venetia and Laura and Robert, because they know exactly what I mean. So I just think to help the kid find their element, it is quite a thing. But we are firefighting. We're firefighting with parents, because what's the point of doing that in school when they go home and they're ruined, you know? So it needs this development of teaching parents is more difficult than the kids and teachers, of course.
Rosso, I'm going to stop you there. We're moving into parents. So, and this is always the problem in our built environment. We can end up sorting out the world and sort of, as you say, trying to think about. That's great, but let me go on to Kate Westbrook. So, Kate, do you want to? Because time is going through very quickly here. Great.
Yeah, I think I suppose my specialism is education. So that's how I kind of talk about the built environment, is through using schools programming. So I work at the REBA, and we take architects into schools across the country. And I suppose and as a previous school teacher, my frustration always was that we were under so much pressure as school teachers to fit even just the curriculum itself into our time. So if we're going to use schools as just a route to getting to the young people and getting those opportunities to speak to them, and we need to really engage teachers in this conversation, and we really need to find out how find kind of clever ways of, you know, at the moment we know we can't add architecture into the curriculum straight away. That's a long-term aim maybe, but it's not going to happen immediately. Lots of people manage to sort of fight for that in their individual schools, these little pockets of amazing practice. But how can we be really wily and clever and creative about the way we use architecture in the built environment as a structure and a framework for teaching some of those parts of the curriculum, or teaching some of those skills which are already bits of the curriculum? I think it's about, if you want to engage schools, you really need to know about what they're forced to do in their day-to-day, and they are a bit like sausage factories, unfortunately. So much pressure on teachers. So it's not their fault, and it's not the children's fault, and it's how can we be really clever about using what they have in the curriculum to our advantage, and making that work for us. At the moment, you know, the dream is that we have brilliant architecture curriculums, and there are things like the T levels which have built environment as the topic for the T level. So there are people trying to change the face of that, but there are also ways of being really clever about, you know, if somebody's coming to you as a maths teacher and saying, I want to use architecture to teach maths, I think we can do it. You know, there are ways of being really clever about doing that. Yeah, and talk to me if you want to find out how I do it as well.
And I think there's a lot, and what TET's trying to do is obviously collect. So we sort of have a data bank of examples, good examples, because it's only by capacity building and showing rather than disparate things happening. We all know, and you know, I will go back and say, in fact, maybe there was more creativity, and as Neil will say, in the curriculum than used to be now. It's more of a struggle, especially at secondary. Primary is different. We know that it's an easier route, but we need to ensure that how do we help capacity build with that around that formal education. And I think this is why we have to split this formal education, or compulsory, as I remember Jorge said, and also informal or non-compulsory. And when we are in it, we're in two areas. We're either, sometimes we're in both, and others we focus on the informal, i.e. some more the placemaking, community engagement, and the others where is out of school or extracurricular activity. Or as we did with Open City, was ensure that any of our programs were embedded around the curriculum, not trying to do anything extra, but saying, how can we really sort of show them that this really is useful and important, and actually it works, because we know a lot of it works. So sorry, Ellie Meach, I think. And Ellie,
Yeah.
you put your hand up, have you still got
Yes.
it?
Oh, sorry, mine was up new. I just, was really wanting to build on that point, and I agree a lot with what you're saying about being able to build this design capacity. I'm the design champion at the Glass House, and we do a lot of workshops with school, and inevitably what this discussion and what these workshops throw up is this issue that different schools have different levels of resourcing and ability to engage with these opportunities. And a lot of what we talk to kind of the schools we work with about is, how can we bring this to you? How can we slot this into what you do so it's the least distraction from the curriculum and you need to put the least amount of resources in? And I think being able to build up that kind of evidence base of workshops or interactions that work is really important, but also being able to offer these extracurriculars where they are potentially not forced in through compulsory teaching, as you're referring it to, but the open house opportunities for students to engage with education outside of school, I think is just as important as bringing it into school as well.
Thank you. Okay, and sorry, Neil's got, and there's quite a few on the chat, so I'm just trying to pick up with those. And I think just to say that I think there's two sides, because we have been touching on the curriculum, and I'm just looking at the time, maybe to look at a bit more on the sort of community engagement, because I know some of you have been doing that, and maybe some of the question around that is, if you were looking at your own practice, if we're trying to say, going back to the personal development of the young people, not just oneself, is what ways do you think you could add or improve or find other partners to help about that personal development? Because I think it's really important in terms of going back to the education, seeing the value of the area we're working in to the educational sector. Though I will also add, and I think we all say this, we're not going to change the curriculum. I think we have to recognise that. All the arts are going out, forget about design and architecture, but it's saying how can we capacity build and actually show by collating all these examples and actually recognising what those values are, then we can try and push this further beyond maybe where we are. So, but Neil, kind of bring you back in, and then maybe, I don't know if Amy wants to say, have comments as well, and Katia as well. I think you've got a hand up, and Penny. So let's get going. Neil.
Number one, working with the schools, just a quick one, is that I run projects in collaboration with architectural practices where we look at STEAM, which is science, engineering, technology, art, which is the A, and maths. So we've got projects that we've devised all around that, which we connect to the cross-curricular activities. So we go to the maths, the geography, the history, etc., and that's how you can link it together. One of the things is Penny hit it, just tipped on it. How do you connect to the non-traditional and the traditional people who basically feel a disadvantage outside of the realms of the normal everyday curriculum? They're not going to come to the after school clubs. They're not going to engage in the holiday projects. So what we have to do is, and I'm doing it through, and there's people who are starting to do it with, as I said to you, the circular economy of education, is to link music going into youth centres, because youth centres, the demise of the youth structure, youth service, was a great demise of outdoor activity and creative activities, because the youth centres actually used to do a hell of a lot of creative work. I know, because I was a youth centre youth leader myself. If I can quickly just share this screen again, what I'm going to do is I am going to bring up a diagram which hopefully you'll be able to see in a sec. You're right. Can you see this one?
Not yet.
Can everyone see this?
Not yet.
Right. Let me just do it again then. Share screen. Right. Here we go. Right. So this diagram, I've been working with Dennis Austin, and this is how we're looking at connecting all the different architectural practices, universities, and architecturally based initiatives. And what we're doing here is these are all the ones that I'm personally connected to. So you can see around the bottom, you've got the architectural practices. Around the top, we've got the universities. And I think, well, I know that this is the way forward, is if we set up cells like this. We're calling it small to big to small, because through myself and through people like Dennis and Jim Rooney's on this thing here, you can see how we can connect, we engage with the community. And like, as I said to you the other day, I went into a school for non-traditional kids on the verge, and we connect using this sort of diagram so that we can bring in architects, bring in educators, bring in projects like the AF Architectural Foundation. And I think this is the way we have to set about. So if you're asking us why, maybe if we start to look at things in terms of diagrams and connectivity like this, then we could hopefully move forward.
Okay, right. Thanks, Neil. Let's get you off. So Penny, you've got your hand up, sorry.
Yes, well, it was just to, I just wanted to disagree with you in a beautiful way, Victoria, because I'm part of the APPG for Art, Craft and Design Education, and architecture is part of that conversation. And there is a proposal to write a new cultural education plan, and you said we couldn't change the curriculum, and I think we can. And I think over the last couple of years, there's been quite a move to this point in time, which is, you know, culture reset and everything else. But it's the first time I've ever said this in my life, but there's a really good woman who works for Ofsted, and her name's Jen Gibbs, and no relation to Nick Gibb, who's obviously I don't have any high esteem for. And Jen is, she's a young Black art teacher, assistant head. And I think yesterday we were part of a discussion around pedagogy, and I think she will be knocking from the inside. So I just wanted to leave you with a bit of hope. And I put in the chat that we are rewriting Ken's All Our Futures with a group. So there will be a contemporary multimodal version. But yeah, so I think there is hope. But just to finish, and then I'll hand over. But I mean, projects like Forest of Imagination that don't just have to happen in Bath, by the way. We've had an invitation to go to Montreal, but obviously we can't travel yet. But that really kind of flattens the hierarchy, and it's about children and young people, their families, creative professionals, architects, designers, artists, philosophers, scientists, environmentalists, everybody working together, you know, and a lot of those are parents and carers working together as a community practice, and also as almost like a Trojan horse that everybody's involved, so it can be quite subversive, because you're then having a conversation about the power of creativity and imagination, nature in our lives, but in a sense of kind of creative placemaking in the city, in an urban context or in a rural context. So, you know, I'd be certainly very keen to continue a conversation with TET and colleagues on the call, many of whom I know, but to think about how we could take that into action.
Thank you. Thanks, Penny. And Amy, you've got your hand up, so thanks, Penny, for that. And I'm glad actually there is, I mean, I'm always positive and hopeful. So if this is the right time, right place, that would be even more fantastic with the amount of work going on. Amy,
Thanks, Victoria. Just a couple of things I wanted to share. I think it's more, I suppose you were saying about more the community engagement side of things. And it was just to sort of say something, and a lot of the child-friendly city work that we've been doing is thinking about the kind of voice and agency of young people as citizens in their own right. They have no democratic agency. Stuff, you know, to do with place and placemaking disproportionately impacts their lives, and yet they have very little agency to shape that. And myself, and I know lots of other people on the call will have been involved in projects where they have had the opportunity to physically shape places, and that's great, and it's an amazing experience. But I think from my experience, the projects where young people have got involved, either through formal education or non-formal education, where they have had the opportunity to input their views, their opinions, help shape strategies, and feel like they're, you know, able to have a tangible impact on the way their towns and their cities and their spaces are developing. In terms of personal development, which I know was quite a focus of today, that is so powerful. You know, as you know, I think Fiona said, or it might have been Kate, sorry, because it was in the chat, I didn't quite see. Obviously, not all young people are going to go into placemaking as a career, but they are all going to be citizens, and we want them to be passionate and engaged and feel confident to contribute to kind of place conversations in their own right as citizens. So it's just to say that, backing up, I think, a little bit what Penny's been saying, that in all of our conversations about architecture and placemaking with young people, I think climate change has got to be a central pillar of that, and we've got to weave that into the narrative whenever we're talking. That can be an advantage in terms of packaging something up and putting it across the schools. And the final thing I just wanted to say was just something around governors as well. We've talked about teachers and needing to talk to teachers. I've been, I helped set up a school in inner city Bristol in a very diverse area, and have been a governor. Schools are under so much pressure, teachers are, but in terms of, if we want schools to be able to be doing different and interesting things, we also have to think about the narrative that we're putting across the governors, and so that they can be convinced. If they're convinced, they will give more flexibility, more agency for teachers to do different projects, collaborative projects with other partners. But we've got to craft a narrative which shows them how it will help them deliver what they're already under immense pressure to do, and they will see the value. I think especially in this kind of COVID recovery times, where children, young people have missed out on so much, there is a real opportunity in terms of additional enrichment and opportunity and learning outside the classroom and all of those things that they might be open to right now, which is really important to the kind of well-being, academic and social recovery of those children. So it could be a real opportunity right now. So I'll stop there.
No, that's great. I think, sorry, I've got a frog in my throat, won't go away. Sorry. And then it actually reminded me of two things with Open City. We actually had a vote at 14 manifesto under the local neighbourhood plan, and people said, but they shouldn't, they're too young. And we said, well, this is their space and they should have a voice in it. And the next part of it was how to reach out by putting them on the committee. And we said, no, the whole thing is go to the school, they create their own group, their own plans, etc., and bring that voice. And I think it's always interesting when you see, in the room here, where we've had presentations jointly with counsellors, planning counsellors, and those who articulated it best were always the kids. Actually, it wasn't the adults. They went out, they understood, articulated very clearly, very quickly, and could understand where they thought it should be going. And the usual was, so how are you as adults going to achieve this? But so I think there's plenty of ways, and I think it comes back to the issue of how do we take this forward? And I suppose this looking at the time of things, there's so many questions and comments coming from everybody, but we're still a converted group, as it were. We need to sort of spread. It's that I always use a spidergram approach. We just need to continually connect everybody, and Neil's way of connecting things. So with these chats are aiming to bring new people in and to pick up on questions. I mean, even today we most probably widened it more than we were intended, but that's fine. I think that's the whole point. We're not going to, at this point, we just really wanted to get people's thoughts and how, listening to this, how maybe you can, if you're in practice, how you can change things or amend things, what else you might be able to do hearing about this. From our perspective of TET, as say the primary, I'm just reading what we've said, the built environment has huge impact on our health and well-being, and our relationship with place is fundamental to our day-to-day cultural experience, shaping our sense of identity and our attitudes to our environment and ourselves. And I think that is still, I think with what we're saying, I think that still holds true. One of the ways we started this was actually doing awards only for school teachers, but with COVID actually created a bit of a problem. So it's actually creating awards for best activity or best program. I've used the word best, but people putting nominating people for this award. Because of COVID, we actually had to we moved into more youth engagement as the first set of awards. So in fact, the awards system program will come online, but it's about youth participation, non-formal engagement. But following that, when these schools are back, we will begin the scheme for schools, so more compulsory or formal education. And this is one of the ways we can collect or collate so many examples, so many great examples out there, and use TET as a platform. And it is a platform to direct people to examples, or be it, it might be reports, etc. So there is a sort of conduit way. And the reason we're doing it is because we don't intend to be practitioners. I myself have been a practitioner, but it's really saying, stepping back and saying, all of you are doing it not to create yet another group, but it's more to actually bring all this information together and actually show the value of it to the other stakeholders. And I think it's those out there, stakeholders, and I think governors is really a good example of doing that as one way. I know from my own experience of working in planning counsellors and planning officers, often it's better to actually go to the planning counsellors to change the mindset, which then drives the change into the planning officers. So governors, in a way, is a sort of similar way. But there's massive work to do still, but there's a massive work that has been done. And we hope that you will help support TET in achieving this, and let us know anything you think might be connected to help do this building, this sort of capacity building of information, sharing knowledge, sharing resources, and also help define the future roadmap as well, because we see this as part of everybody helping this roadmap that we're trying to create to help this process move forward as well. So I'd just like to have to stop on that, and I'd just like to say so many chats at the going through the chat room as well, and obviously we need more time as usual, but knowing we've all got day jobs as well. So I will close this, but like to just thank all the panelists and thank my board member as well and associates. And please get in touch with us, but also let other people know about TET and what we're trying to achieve in our, as I call, small action, but hopefully a big impact. So thanks very much indeed, and have a good day.